Welcome to today's early edition, Wednesday one. This is Health and Safety on Set, the COVID edition. I will let our panelists go around and introduce themselves, and then we'll have each one kind of talk about their little area of expertise and how they're coping with the current unprecedented situation, and then we'll take some questions. So, Carolyn, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, I'm Carolyn Marie, freelance makeup artist. I've been doing makeup for well over 20 years, and I do television, film, theater, print, and I'm also a certified event planner. And so that helps me in planning, especially during COVID. I've had to juggle a lot of things, do a lot of training, and during the COVID shutdown, I've taken time to become COVID certified by Barbicide. And I also took a certification course with Safe Sets International. And it's really helped me to understand what's going on around me as well as what I'm doing in my little makeup circle. You know, I like to keep abreast of, you know, how it should be on the set. And so I've spent a lot of time revamping my makeup kit and, you know, just preparing for going back out into a COVID world.
Great. Mark?
My name's Mark Finkelpearl. I am a executive producer in Washington, D.C. I've been in town closing in on 25 years at this point. Have my own production company with a partner, and we are called Flying Scoop Media and Entertainment. We have 2 shows on the air right now, one of which is in production on its 2nd season in both Tennessee and Alabama. And so we do have crews in the field as we speak, working. And so I can talk to how we've done that, what we've done in terms of preparation for that, and acquiring of PPE, those sorts of issues.
Great. And Jay?
All right, so I'm Jay Schlossberg. I own a company called Media Central. And on August 1st, we celebrated 27 years. What we do is we set up local crew and gear around the US and now in 114 different countries. We generally deal in the broadcast arena with some of the networks, HBO, Showtime, some others, and then a lot of companies like Mark's actually that are producing factual doc series or factual reality series, that sort of thing. And we do a lot of behind the scenes for major shows on Netflix, Showtime, and other networks. And we do a little bit of corporate stuff too. So we've had to deal with trying to figure out, and we'll talk about this later, about how when production kind of picked up after everything fell apart, that 2nd or 3rd week of March, we had some shoots that next week, and how we dealt with that issue of having some sort of safety protocol when there were none. Like Carolyn, we are also Safe Sets International COVID-19 Level A certified, and all our crews will be as well.
All right. So yeah, we got some knowledgeable people here. So yeah, starting off, I mean, I think everyone is kind of experiencing work is slowly starting to pick up. So I think a good place to start is just, yeah, how do you guys feel about the guidelines and the safety guides that have been put forward by various organizations? Do you guys feel like those are enough? Those are sufficient? Do you do anything extra above and beyond?
Well, I'll go first, but I think Mark can give a great answer for that because you're directly with the networks a little bit more than I am at the moment. But as I said, there were no rules, we started filming the 4th week of March, and I needed to figure out what to do to keep the crew safe, and then the contributors or the people on camera. And so I just went with common sense, which was, mask, everybody has gloves. All the gear gets disinfected before they go in. Once the gear gets put back in their cases, all that gets disinfected. Temperature taken, everybody stays 6 feet. Crew in their own vehicles if possible. If you got a crew of 50, that's a little hard, but on a smaller 2, 3, 4 person crew, separate cars, making sure that when we loaded in, the talent wasn't there. So we had space to set up, no wireless mics with exception, all those sorts of things that eventually once Discovery and the unions and Netflix all had their 15, 20 page white papers, basically it was boiled down to pretty much, those sorts of things. We generally don't deal with different departments, a camera department and, lighting department and, wardrobe department. And these are most of my clientele is, 2, 3, 4 person crews with a minimal amount of talent. So that's kind of how I dealt with it. And then we became Safe Sets International, as I said earlier, COVID-19 Level A certified. And going forward, as we book each crew who we haven't booked since COVID came about in the middle of March, I'm having everyone from DP down to PA and everybody in between all take the test and get certified. Because it's, it's safety plus creativity at this point, and there's no interview worth getting, worth filming and have someone get sick because of it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So that's kind of how we've dealt with it on a smaller scale. But I think Mark's dealing with it on a larger scale, so maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, what we're doing is, as I mentioned, a second season. It's a show called Fastest Cars in the Dirty South. Discovery Incorporated is the client. It airs on both Motor Trend and Discovery. And the first thing we needed to do was give them some protocols. They asked us, what are you going to do down there? So we put together our own little white paper and submitted it to their Department of Global Security. They don't necessarily approve it. They just sort of take receipt of it. They want the onus to be on the producers that everything is going to be as safe as possible. While I knew that we were ramping up in the spring, March, April, May, I was really trying to source as much PPE as I could. And during a period where there wasn't a lot of PPE out there, I was able to source N95 masks for my people on both sides of the camera, and felt very comfortable about trying to give them the highest level of protection with that. Also sourced gloves and masks, sanitizer by the gallon. And then as we got closer to actually moving into production, we started sourcing testing for our people. Again, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, cast and crew. We required that everyone be tested when they got down there. As I mentioned, we're shooting this in Alabama and Tennessee. We got tested locally for a couple of different reasons. Number one is that quarantine period would not have to be as long, because if you get tested down there, you get your results back in 3 to 5 days, and you only have to sit in your hotel, or in our case, apartments, for that period of time before you get the all clear and you can join the production. That was another thing, to find out which clinics we could walk into. And we did a lot of research ahead of time about that to get prepared for that. We will also be testing our people as they come back out. Our people are freelancers. They don't want to bring this home to their families, and it's almost as important for them to, or more important to a certain degree, to know that they don't have the virus coming out of the situation. Our crews are slightly bigger than what Jay described. We accordion in size depending on the kind of scene work that we're doing. Sometimes our crews are as small as 2 or 3 people, but we also, during this production, have crews as big as 15 to 20 people. So we need to manage that. And as Jay mentioned, one of the main things that we've done is really to eliminate any sort of communal living or communal transportation. In our first season, we did rent a big house together, and we were all in a large Airbnb that was housing the director of photography, who was in from Los Angeles, and the line producer who was in from Washington, and blah, blah, blah. And now everyone has their own apartment. No one is sharing communal space in any way, or private space for that matter. And we've done the same with transportation. We used to have a van that would get everybody to set, and everyone now has their own car or vehicle of some sort. The network did not pay us any extra for this. We've just figured it out within our budget to add all of these layers of safety to what we're doing.
Great. Yeah, that's a lot of steps. That's a lot of things to juggle. Carolyn, you have arguably one of the most intimate jobs on set. So what wisdom can you share with us?
Well, of course, the makeup artist is the most vulnerable because there's no social distancing and the talent cannot wear a mask. So we, as far as equipment, a lot of disposables and, disposable smocks, whereas before we could just, put the same smock on everyone. So of course, for myself, the mask, the shield, and gloves. And once the client gets on the set, normally in preparation, I would talk to them, do you wear contacts? Do you have any issues? But now I would rather do that conversation before I sit them down because, you have the droplets flying. So have that conversation before, once they get in the chair. I've revamped my entire kit because of safety. Before we had just the open pack of brushes and we would just pull one out. Well, since then, I'm a brush junkie. So when I took everything out of my kit and then my spares, I had like 60 or 70 or 80 brushes. So I was able to have enough brushes for a complete set for about 7 or 8 people. So I cleaned and sanitized those. I have a UVC and ozone wand, sanitation wand, sterilization wand. And once I do all that, I clean all the brushes off and then I put them in a sanitized packet. So when each client comes, I open a package, it's totally sanitized. And then as not to contaminate the makeup, I have artist palettes where I put in each well of the palette whatever I'm going to use for that client, because we can no longer dip, brush in. I mean, we would change, have a fresh brush, but then we would dip that fresh brush into the same eyeshadow and things like that. No more for that. So we have to figure out, look at the client, figure out what we're going to use, and then put that in a sanitized palette. And I have a whole sanitized palette, and in that palette, it's everything I need for that client. That's clean, sanitized, and I don't open it up until I'm ready to work on that client. We can no longer use director's chairs because they're porous and we can't clean it. So after each client, we have to, sanitize the chair, throw away I purchased disposable smocks. I'll be using more airbrush than just the regular because airbrush is less contact. So, but it also depends on where, because when you go in, and this is for producers too, normally when I go into a set, I say, hi, I'm Carolyn, makeup artist. Where do you want me to go? And they look around and say, okay, just go over there. Well, now it's best if we have a separate area. If that separate area isn't available, then it should be an area with not a lot of traffic, well ventilated, not a lot of traffic. Makeup artists are no longer using a lot of blow dryers because the talent has no mask on, and if you start blow drying, then the particles go everywhere. So we've just had, a lot of new expense for us, a lot of throwaways where before you wash things and bring it back. Well, now an awful lot of throwaways. So I think you know, I've, based on the training and the guidelines from, you know, CDC, you know, EPA, I've kind of made my kit so it's compliant with all of the requirements. And, you know, and then I have a friend in LA, she does high-end clients and all the big movies, and she's actually gone back on set. Well, she said they worked for 6 days and then they shut down LA again. So she actually went on set, and she said there was just a learning curve where she had to just, you know, figure out how to do things differently. And while you're doing makeup, and this has happened to me most of the time, the producer will come in and talk to the client while I'm doing the makeup and everybody's talking. Well, you know, that's probably not gonna happen. So, you know, just a lot of changes, but, you know, I think we can adjust. And it looks like you guys have just done a great job. And I also had that safe set. So, you know, I'm sure, and based on what you all have said, I mean, you know, the set's gonna be safe and the makeup area is gonna be safe. So I think, you know, it's something that's doable.
I keep forgetting I'm muted. Great, thank you. And welcome, Cathie.
Better late than never.
That's right, that's right. I assume you were late because you were following all the safety protocols for Zoom meetings.
I do not have a good excuse. My apologies.
No problem. If you would like to introduce yourself and then take over the reins of moderation, and I will step in the back.
Terrific. Yes, thank you. And again, apologies for my delayed appearance. So my name is Cathie Saadeh. I'm a solo practitioner in entertainment law, and I'm also serving this year as the president of WIF. I've come to the world of COVID professionally because several of my clients are producers and have asked me to develop protocols for them to ensure or help ensure a safe set. So I'm happy to kind of just share my experiences now, you know, or maybe the legal stuff is best at the end after we kind of talk through more the practical production side. So maybe Jay or Mark, you want to share your perspectives.
Yeah, well, we covered quite a bit of that, I think,
Okay.
before
All
we
right.
jumped on. But, you know, Jay has a great way of looking at this. He and I were talking about it, and a lot of it really boils down to common sense, which Jay, you know, you're more articulate about than I am. But it really is about planning and planning as far in advance as you can, especially when it comes to sourcing PPE. That has become slightly easier to do as the pandemic has eased, but we don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the third quarter or fourth quarter of the year, or what's going to happen moving into 2021. Jay, I'll throw it to you. You have a great perspective on this.
Well, I think one thing that has changed, and actually Carolyn went over it, but to be more precise about it, doesn't matter whether it's a one-man band or if you've got a crew of 30, everything takes a little bit longer, and everybody has to slow down a little bit. That's hard when you have you got to get 6 interviews in between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. But there has to be that's part of why I like the safe sets certificate and making sure all the crew does it, because they have to think about what they're doing. They have, just like we all have to think about when we have a mask on, you know, touching our face. We have a mask on, but now we're touching our face.
That's right.
Before you touch your mask again, you got to wash your hands. So it's a whole thing of just slowing down enough to make sure that you're focused, you're doing what you're supposed to do, you're not doing what you're not supposed to do, and just taking more time to. You want to get the craft done properly, but you also want to make sure everybody is safe.
Right. So since you have cover the kind of the practical on-set aspects of it. Let me talk a little bit about how I view this from the legal perspective. When I think about the paperwork involved, right, there's really 4 things I like to have my clients have. One is what I call the holistic producer protocols, which is everything the producer is going to think about, right? They're going to think about, do I have the PPE in stock? Do I have, everyone's talking about, beginning of day testing. Do I have my entry location set up? And it's like at a threshold where people can't come on set or on location until they've had the remote temperature. They've certified, they've said, no, I haven't had the fever or the symptoms in the last 24 hours. The logistics of like running the production day, how is food set up, right? If you're on a set where there happens to be a refrigerator, have you taped the refrigerator closed because you don't want people grabbing the handle, all that kind of very practical stuff. So that's what I call the holistic procedures. But then, sort of what you were just talking about, Jay, the very practical reminders to crew, don't share equipment, or if you share equipment, disinfect it, or, make sure to stay 6 feet apart, or wear the mask unless you're eating and drinking. That kind of practical crew guidance is a much shorter document because people aren't going to read, a 20-page document, before they're going on shoot. One of my clients said, this is a guy reading this in his car, drinking his coffee, right? You want short and sweet, the high notes, just reminders, wear your mask, socially distance, all the common sense stuff. Then we talk about waivers and releases. And I know this is something that a lot of people in the industry are dealing with. So basically it's a document that cast and crew might be asked to sign at the beginning of a shoot. And it can do a couple of things. First of all, you certify that you haven't had the symptoms, right? I know I haven't had the fever, sign to that. You sign that you've been given the COVID compliance protocols and you're going to agree to them. Yes, I agree to wear the mask. I agree to be socially distant, that kind of thing. And then it gets into, different people are taking different approaches here. Assumption of risk. I know I could be exposed or infected to COVID by participating in this production, but I know I'm doing that willingly. And then there's also discussions of, we call this covenant not to sue. I promise not to sue the production company if I get coronavirus, or I release them from liability. So that waiver release document can be just as simple as I'm certifying I don't have symptoms, or I agree to comply with the protocols, all the way to giving up substantial legal rights. So that's the third of the 4 documents. The 4th document is maybe the most important from a production standpoint. What I like to give my clients, so we do these big old compliance protocols, the holistic one I referred to, and I look at, the union guidelines, but I also, the LA production guidelines are very helpful, and they're a little shorter than the SAG guidance or the white paper that's out there. And again, it's stuff that we've all talked about, but taking your holistic procedures and just basically doing checklists. What do I have to do pre-production? What do I have to do start of shoot? Let's say you're on a site for a week. Well, the things you do that Monday morning, assuming it's a Monday to Friday shoot, things you do that Monday morning, you only have to do once. You put up signs in the bathroom, close toilet lid before flushing, keep windows open, moving the furniture around, all that stuff you do at the very beginning of the shoot. Then you have start of day procedures, right? Every day, confirm the location was cleaned overnight. Every day, make sure the windows have been reopened if you're shooting interior. Every day, make sure there's enough hand towels in the bathroom because you don't want people using the air dryers. Make sure there's enough PPE stocked, right? That kind of daily routine. So beginning of pre-shoot, beginning of shoot, start of day, end of day procedures, right? You walk around, are any masks or gloves sitting around, kind of that stuff. And then end of shoot. And end of shoot can be things like, hey, if someone was exposed on set, have we notified people, right? Has the location been cleaned before you say, okay, we're done with the location? So I think, if you look at the union guidelines, which are phenomenal, a lot of work went into it. I mean, taking that kind of big bucket of stuff and breaking it down into like little checklists, I think is really helpful. And you know, whatever ensures that the things that are supposed to be done get done, that is the best thing to do from a health perspective and also from a legal risk perspective. So. So I don't know if we have any questions that have come in yet.
Hi, Melissa, we do have a question. And Mark answered a little bit, but how do you go about testing the crew before the shoot? And what do you require from the crew in terms of quarantining once they're in the testing period?
You know, interestingly enough, in corporate America, so the union guidelines came out and said they want an actual COVID test, not an antibody test, because the antibody tests are not as, you know, accurate as the COVID test. But you know, in corporate America, no one is testing for corona. I shouldn't say no one, but it's not generally accepted to test for corona. People are doing temperature checks. So I think at a minimum, a production would need to do temperature checks every day. And what I've written into policies is employees, cast and crew should check themselves at home. And if they have 100.4 or above, don't come to set, don't come to location. But even then, everybody coming into the threshold should have I mean, that's just a remote temperature. You know, you get the thermometer and you can do it. But in terms of actual testing, I mean, the challenge is where do you get the tests? And it varies state by state. So, you know, the producers I've worked with had not been part of a union production. So I don't know how union productions are complying with the requirement to do COVID testing. I think twice a week is the recommendation.
And then the time it takes to get the results is a problem.
Right.
If you can't get it, you know, within a day.
Right. Exactly.
We're all non-union. There's no union involved in productions for a company like Discovery. But as I said, we're testing when we come into our location. We are taking temperatures every day. I didn't mention that in the beginning, Cathie, but I'm not working from any notes just off the top of my head. But we are taking temperatures every day. And then, as I mentioned, we are having folks test before they go back home to make sure they're not bringing the virus back to their families.
Mm-hmm. So you are doing corona testing.
I'm sorry?
You are doing corona testing.
Yes, we are doing corona testing. We're using local clinics. Our production is in both Alabama and Tennessee. Most everybody's getting tested in Alabama. Those results come back in 3 to 5 days, allows us to quarantine everybody for a short period of time before we start working. We did actually have one cast member come back with a positive result, and he immediately quarantined. He was retested. His doctor felt that it could have been a false positive. And when he was retested, he was indeed negative. And so he joined our production, but it was about 8 days later,
right.
or so, maybe 6 days later than we had originally intended. So we did run into it, but luckily it was a false alarm.
Right. And I think another thing that's being built into procedures is, or at least people are thinking about, is, you know, practically every role on set, you need to have an understudy for. Not an understudy per se, but, you know, a backup person, right? If your talent the night before a shoot is, you know, runs a fever, you know, you've got all these other things lined up, you know, you should, you know, I think people are really going to start thinking about who's our backup player, because any one of us, you know, could wake up with a fever, or, you know, have a sudden headache, or, you know, whatever symptoms. You know, and you want the show to go on if you've lined up a location or people are flying in. I mean, you don't want the absence of one key player to derail your whole production.
I see a question here. Who pays for tests? In our case, we, the production company, are paying for our cast and crew to be tested out of our budget.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like all this hits the budget in so many ways. Having a COVID safety officer on set, you know, who is that going to be? Is that someone doing double duty, or is that a specially hired person? I was on a webinar last week where I heard Disney hired 50 registered nurses to serve as, you know, the COVID safety people for all the productions they do. And then, you know, the cost of insurance is also going to go up. Not that you can get insurance for COVID related loss there, you know, that's pretty much being written out of all the policies, but it's increasing just general production insurance as well.
And here's another question. I'm going to ask the first part to Mark and the second part to Carolyn. So Mark, the first part, what's the best place to get PPE? And then Carolyn, following up on that, do you recommend a mask and a shield if the person interviewing someone and the person you are interviewing are not wearing a mask?
I have been very fortunate. I have, through my son, a personal connection to someone in China who sources PPE. And that has become a godsend for our production. So I have gotten my N95 masks directly from China, shipped right to Washington, D.C. I've been very lucky and I feel very grateful for that connection. They're hard to find. Some people believe that N95 masks are overkill, and I understand that argument. However, I don't want any of my people in front or behind the camera to get this. And so I have pretty much insisted that we try and have N95 masks. There are places that I have talked to here in the United States. Specifically, there is a company, and I can share this after when we're all offline. There's a company that does supply governments with PPE, and they're based in Washington, D.C. I was offered 5,000 masks, N95 masks, at $2.90 a mask. But our budget couldn't really absorb $10,000 for just masks. And so I passed on that offer. But those offers do exist. And you can buy masks in bulk. You know, I had mentioned before we got online today on the air, so to speak, that as a member of the Producers Guild of America, we're trying to talk to the folks in Los Angeles about maybe becoming a supplier to producers, independent producers like me, and the independent producers that Jay and Carolyn serve in their work, to source PPE in bulk and then be able to supply it out to their production companies. So the other trick for practical matters is if you do have an Amazon business account, not a regular account where you buy your Whole Foods groceries or whatever you're doing, but an Amazon business account, they are a great source for PPE. And they do have quite a bit available at the moment. As I mentioned, in the spring, it wasn't so readily available, and who knows what's going to happen as we move into the rest of 2020 and into 2021. But that's my perspective on how to source it.
Thank you. And Carolyn, I'll repeat that question about, and this, Mark, it probably will get back to you too as the producer director. In an interview situation, when the interviewer and the interviewee are not in masks, but you want them basically in the same camera, are you suggesting that they have a face shield or something? How are you managing closeness in interview situations?
Is it a situation where they can't stay 6 feet apart?
It would be pretty hard to interview somebody 6 feet apart and have them both in the same camera. I mean, you could do it, but then you wouldn't see their faces.
Yeah, I mean, you can, it depends on the angle of the camera, but I would say yes, for protection of both, because you know you're wearing it to protect the other person. Each person is wearing it to protect the other person. So I would say yes, if they can't have that safe distance, because that is what's recommended. I mean, you're taking a chance. I mean, we do the tests and you know the pre-test before they come in, but I would say yes during the interview. But I think, and maybe, you know, Mark, you can answer, you know, can you get a good camera shot 6 feet
Well,
away? I mean, if you.
yeah, I think the answer is you can. And I think, you know, what it requires is perhaps as large a room as possible and an extra camera. So if you look, for example, at, you know, the interview of the week, so to speak, right now is what Jonathan Swan did with President Trump last week that aired on HBO on August 3rd. And you can see that neither of them are wearing masks. They are socially distant, but there's a third camera. And that third camera is taking the shot from the middle of each profile. So you're able to position your A and B cameras like you would see in a 60 Minutes shoot farther back on longer lenses. And then you're able to have that third angle that essentially creates a socially distant two shot. And that's, I think, how most people are trying to do it if they have to. It requires a bit of a bigger room. I think, you know, we're all used to shooting interviews in various sizes of rooms and trying to make the most out of the space that we have. And I realize that sometimes you can't get that shot wide enough to get a third camera position there where you have people on either end of the frame. But, you know, again, I think it's just, you know, as Jay says, it's a matter of slowing down. It's a matter of planning. It's a matter of trying to figure out where might I be able to pull this off. And what we have done, we've shot, you know, we do a lot of scene work in our works. So it's a documentary, you know, verite style. But for another show that we do with Geraldo Rivera, we have been shooting socially distant interviews. And in that case, we've just used one camera and we've used one operator. So we've dialed in remotely and conducted those interviews via Zoom or via FaceTime. So one of them was in San Francisco. We had a gentleman who was about 70 years old. He was very reticent about coming out. He's in a high-risk group, but he was central to our story, and we convinced him I believe it was in May, to, you know, March and April, he wouldn't leave his house. In May in San Francisco, he finally said he would come to a studio that we had. And we did that with one camera person and obviously without a lavalier mic. We mic'd it purely with shotguns so that everything was mic'd. All he had to do was walk into the studio and sit down, and the camera operator was able to stay 6 feet away at all times.
Yeah, to add to that, even in those single camera situations, with the quality of the zoom, you can get 8 feet, 9 feet if you really need to, and you just come in on the shot and nobody can tell. But another thing no one has asked yet, but it kind of speaks to what you're saying, is that we've been doing a lot. I'd probably say 90% of the crews we've been doing, the client has been interviewing through Zoom from wherever they are. One was in Wales, one was in London, other places. But some have been 1 or 2 camera, where we actually run the cameras through either a Blackmagic or Asia device, which then takes a signal from HDMI to SDI right into the laptop, right into Zoom. So now the client, sitting like we're all sitting, can actually see what the camera is seeing, as opposed to just what the laptop is seeing, because the laptop is there for eyeline for the interview, but they can't really see what's going on in the camera. So we've been doing a lot of that, where you can actually split the screen. And so on one side is the actual camera view, the other side is the eye line between the director, wherever they happen to be, and the talent. But that's also worked on a larger scale too. With the crew not being in the room, we did 4 cameras in Santa Monica. We did 3 at the same time, 3 in Montgomery, Alabama. And I think there were 3 in Boston, and then 1 more in Oprah's house in Montecito. It's part of the series that she has. I think it's on Netflix now. And so we had these, so we had 4, 7, 10, 11 cameras all running through Blackmagic, their own devices, into their own laptops, into Zoom. And then I'm not sure who, my client took care of actually switching cameras. So we had 11 cameras running with almost really no crew in the room. They went in and set up, and then, you know, they skip over to the next room and it's remote. So it's amazing what you can get done. And it's more affordable than you might imagine.
You know, it's interesting to me, in all the guidelines and white papers that are out there, I haven't read anyone saying you shouldn't put talent, on-screen talent, close together, right? I've seen, you know, you should try and cast, you know, natural family groups or natural roommates together. We've heard about, like, on soap operas, whenever there's like a close-up of a hand, it's actually like the actor's spouse's or partner's hand. Like, they try and bring in actual, you know, people who are sharing living conditions together to be on screen. But having said that, you know, what are the optics if you do shoot your interview and you have the interviewer and the subject, you know, 4 feet together? That just doesn't look good these days, right? Because we're also aware of what the virus can do. So one thing people are talking about is compositing in post as a solution here, where you shoot it separately, the people are separate, but you bring them together in post. Are either of you seeing that? Any 3 of you seeing that?
Not yet. Sure,
No,
it's coming.
we're not seeing that. I mean, as I mentioned, what we're doing is verite style, character-driven documentary. And so what we are seeing is that our clients don't mind seeing masks. And we are using masks in front of the camera. And frankly, the program that we're doing down in Alabama is a male-facing, testosterone-driven show. It's meant for men 25 to 54 who like things that have big engines that go vroom, vroom, vroom. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of alpha males in this cast. And at first, they were kicking and screaming. And they were saying, well, the guys on Street Outlaws aren't wearing masks. And we said, yeah, you know what? Those guys look weak. They look weak. You guys are wearing masks and you look like superheroes. You really do. Because it's truly reflective of the moment. It's truly reflective of where we are in the culture. And I think that, I was reticent as an executive producer at first to create a season of television that might feel dated down the road. We're trying to do evergreen programming. But really, when I saw my crew, my cast wearing these masks, it looks fantastic. They do look like superheroes. So in terms of the composite, that doesn't answer your question, but I think that in terms of where we are in this moment culturally, it almost looks strange to not reflective of these times.
Mm-hmm. And I think people are criticizing when you don't, like we know what went around in the DSW commercial where one of the people in the store was not wearing a mask and people were appalled because it's like, how can you not? So I think it is expected. I think it's a show of strength. And, I think it's fun.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think what's driven my clients to reach out to me to draft these compliance protocols, these set safety protocols, is everyone is nervous about this, right? And they want to know that the people they're doing business with are being thoughtful and, being able to hold up a document like, yes, this is our plan, gives people that assurance as well. And I think Melissa has a question for us.
I do. And this kind of follows up on that one. Now I'll get back to another one. Are the productions that you're working on following the zone system, which is in the safety forward guidelines coming from DGA, SAG-AFTRA, and PGA and IATSE? So are you using the zone system kind of they've outlined?
Jay, you want to take
I
that?
haven't had to because our shoots are on much smaller scale, it's all totally non-union, but and we do want guidelines. But so far, most of my shoots are 2, 3, 4 people. There's no departments. It's not like that, so I haven't had to deal with that issue yet.
Same,
You're not.
from what I'm seeing.
Okay. And then, Jay, kind of a question back to you.
Sure.
When you're talking to freelancers, are you talking to them in advance about getting tested and then who's paying for it? Or is it happening once they get on site? Are you asking them, I don't know, do you want a certificate from them before you even consider them for a job? Oh, how are you working with freelancers?
So very well, thank you very much. So the answer to the first question about them getting tested. So now we've done, so it's early August, so 130 days since all this stuff happened, and we've shot around 21 states and about 8 different countries. And by the way, we have to conform to their rules too, wherever we happen to be in any city, state, or any other country. Up until today, for a shoot, we have a 1-day shoot we have in Seattle next week, is the first client that's come to me wanting the crew to be tested before they show up. So I said, of course, and who's paying for that? The client is. So that's, one person, one test. And the fact is the shoot is Wednesday, and the crew can't get tested till Monday. They're already on something else. They can't do it till Monday. There may be no result by Wednesday. So I said, the reality is it may just be, do you have any symptoms? Do you have a temperature? Do you live in a house with family or other people that have had the virus? Have you been around other people with the virus? And do that checklist, because 2 days, they're probably not gonna know anyway.
Right.
But so far, that's the only request, and that's just for one person for 1 day. So that may come, but it hasn't happened yet.
And, it's interesting on the, do you live with anyone who's had symptoms? Have you had symptoms? The challenge is people do get headaches and sore throats and, fevers for reasons other than coronavirus. And so the question becomes, well, if you do live with someone who had symptoms, have they subsequently been tested negative? Because you don't want to write your questionnaire in a way that if someone had a headache or they lived with someone who had a headache 2 weeks ago, you've just lost your crew member for that shoot. So just think about, are there ways that, because people, as I said, can have symptoms and not have coronavirus, and if there's proof that they are not positive, that's a.
And Cathie, has it come up that if you have a whole crew there and you're doing a 1-person shoot and they don't show up, but they're sick or they have a temperature, what happens with the crew? Are they asking if they have to pay the crew, or what happens to the crew?
Yeah, I guess it's how your deal memo is written with your crew, right? And that's why I said, and you don't want that to happen, right? You don't want everyone sitting around waiting for a key person.
Well, we actually, I'm sorry to jump in, but so far that has happened once, but it was in advance, is about 5 days before the shoot, where the sound person, it's a 2-person crew, the sound person was having symptoms. So what they did was what any professional would do, he replaced himself. Turns out he was just had something else. So he actually got back on the shoot. He didn't have COVID. But so because of, at least for me anyway, the level that I'm working on with the amount of people I'm dealing with around the world, that anything can happen. Somebody can trip and sprain their ankle and they can't get to a shoot. They'll replace themselves. Somebody's mother dies and the shoot's tomorrow. They can't go. They replace themselves. So I'm just in a world where the people that I work with are professional enough to know not to call me and say, sorry, good luck. They'll try to fill that role
Right.
We've never had a situation where we can't fill the role yet, but it's only been 27 years. But anything can happen to anybody. COVID's just
That's a good point. Yeah.
one of those things that can happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
I guess,
what I've always done that, so that does work. Yeah.
right. I guess one thing would be talent, right? Because talent might not be able to swap in another, short, redheaded 12-year-old boy or whatever
That's why you don't draw your character descriptions that tightly. But another question, and Mark Phillips, I'll get to your question in just a second. But Cathie Cadis is wondering, do any of you ever see getting back to full crews, or will smaller crews and Zoom interviews be the norm going forward? So how long or how do you think we'll get back to full-size crews?
Well, that's a good question. I think that there will be some sort of a new normal. And I think that coronavirus will have played some role in that, but I also think that the normal budget squeeze that everyone is going through, especially in my corner of the sandbox, which is nonfiction television, may contribute to that as well. So, you do have that aspect of it, of people see that they're getting the same product with smaller crews and smaller production models, and maybe they want to stick with that. But every piece of creative is different. Every production demands a different way of thinking and way of crewing, and I think that for the most part, people will still try and give producers what they need to create the product that they're paying for and want in the can. But yeah, I do think we're probably at the leading edge of some sort of a new normal in certain ways.
I think so too. I think as far as, when the virus is over, hopefully we won't have to do the mask and the shield. But as far as, my makeup case, it's organized so well, I think I'll keep it that way, because it's a lot easier to just take a packet for a person rather than open up the bag of brushes or the roll of brushes and which one am I going to pick? I mean, it's just already there. So I think I'll keep a lot of the new habits I've developed. I think it'll work really well. But the mask and everything else can go. But
I've heard from a number of people who, since Mark addressed earlier, we don't know what's going to happen third and fourth quarter, and whether this is going to continue to spread the way it is in the South and come back up into the Northeast and get much worse. Worried about the third and fourth quarter also with the flu season, and how people are going to be so confused because you have a fever and you have a headache and you're tired, a lot of the similar symptoms. And I'm wondering out loud to everybody that maybe actually flu season won't be that bad. Why? Because we're all wearing masks. We're all washing our hands. We're all disinfecting. We're thinking more about, what we're doing, what we're touching. You go out and get the mail and you read the mail, that's fine. But before you do anything else, wash your hands. And so it's sort of changing how we're dealing with just sort of everyday life. And I'm wondering if maybe we'll actually have not a bad flu season at all. So we don't know, but that's a concern that some clients have brought up to me about shoots that we have going on in October, November, December, about those two things combining to making a bad situation.
Right.
And good. I mean, if you're doing something long enough, like washing your hands, you develop that habit, and it becomes part of everyday life. So it's a good thing.
Right. And I just want to emphasize, there's a lot of talk, we think about going back to production, we think about things like masking and social distancing, washing hands, disinfecting equipment, all these common sense, good health safety measures. That's really important to think about. I think it's also important to acknowledge that the virus is out there. People are going to get sick. They are going to have symptoms. And what does happen when midday, one of your crew is like, I have a fever? Right? Obviously, you want to get that person away from everyone else. How are they getting home? Right? Did they drive themselves? Did they come on public transport? Are you going to call them an Uber? Right? How do you think that through? Then you've got the issue of where was this person on set? What did he touch? Do we need to stop? Do we need to clean those areas? Who do we have to tell, right? How are you going to notify everyone else? Hey, there was an exposure on set. Do you have to tell the location owner, the location management? So I just, I think because we're just sort of reopening now and sort of getting back into production, I think there's a lot of focus on this front end safety controls, which are absolutely important. But I think everyone should kind of game plan what happens in this other situation, because it's not a matter of if, it's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when it happens. And you want to have kind of thought all that stuff through ahead of time, because it will happen, unfortunately.
And Cathie, that anticipated a question, which is if on the day of the shoot, once the shoot is started, someone has a fever or isn't feeling well, how does that affect cancellation policies?
Well, cancellation policies for what? Right? I mean, there's something called force majeure clauses, which everyone now knows, in addition to us lawyers, which is something out of the control of everyone happens, no harm, no foul to get out of the contract. In other words, one side or the other isn't penalized if there's, for example, an earthquake. Same thing with the coronavirus that's now being pandemics, epidemics, quarantines, government lockdowns, that's all being written into force majeure. So at the end of the day, it depends what your contract says with your location, with your cast and crew. And also it depends, are they employees? Because then you have, state employment laws to think about and federal employment laws for that matter. So.
If only there were yes or no answers to these questions. Another one kind of along those lines and directly for you, Cathie. Is there a template for the consent not to sue agreement or waiver that you were talking about that's not going to get challenged in court?
Well, there's templates for everything on Google. Challenged in court, different states take different views on these waivers. If it depends what you're asking to be waived, right? If someone's saying, you promise not to sue us for anything, anytime, and that's really broad, but maybe the promise to sue is not for coronavirus exposure. That's a much more limited waiver. Again, like all attorneys, my advice is going to be talk to an attorney to get the right language.
Okay, I think we answered those. I'm looking for some more questions, or does somebody, based on the questions we've been having, want to add more information? Oh, wait, just got one. Yeah, it's kind of the same question. So short of Google, Cathie, do you know of a good source for some templates related to, I would say your insurance company maybe too, but any kind of forms or templates, or have you seen any that you're like, oh, that's that's covered some things I haven't thought of?
Yeah, I mean, look, in my personal life, I got a waiver from my swimming pool, my neighborhood swimming pool. My daughter rides horses and she got a waiver from the stables. I mean, it's not hard to find these waivers floating around. And I'm not saying you need to get a waiver. I personally think the best risk mitigation strategy for a producer is to do all these things we're talking about, to be really careful about coronavirus. If you are showing your cast and crew that you're taking this really seriously, we know coronavirus is out there, and whether someone gets it on your set or on the, walking home or, at the restaurant, I mean, you have to prove causation, right? To bring a claim, and who's to say that the person got coronavirus on your set? So I think just a good offense is the best defense. I'm not saying you need to get a waiver. I'm just saying that you definitely want to get people signing off that they're going to comply with your protocols, because that's really important. Because, if someone comes on your set and doesn't wash their hands and doesn't disinfect their equipment and doesn't socially distance, and then they get coronavirus, you want to be able to hold up a piece of paper saying, look, they said they were going to do all this and, they didn't, and they got coronavirus. So that's an important function of that. But to answer the question, I mean, in terms of templates, no, there's not, I can't think of one particular place I would go to look at a template, but there's examples out there.
And I'm pretty sure in the safety forward, they don't have examples of templates, which I was kind of surprised. I wasn't surprised by, but I would expect from some of the conversations that I've been in with unions and guilds that they're trying to come up with a waiver they can live with, something that they're confident that if their people sign it, it works well in both directions. But I haven't seen that yet either.
And also in these waivers, I mean, you really want to, the two things you really want to get are, yes, I promise to comply with all these protocols. And then also, and I certify I don't currently have these symptoms. I haven't had coronavirus without subsequently testing negative or look at the CDC guidelines for end of self-isolation. That's really that's the gold standard of when someone can return to work. And it changed a little bit recently. I want to say if you were not symptomatic, it's 2 negative corona tests in a 24-hour gap between them. And if you were symptomatic, I want to say it's 10 days without symptoms. But look at the CDC website. If someone's like, yes, I did test positive or I did have symptoms, but then I've met these CDC guidelines for return, end of self-isolation, they should be allowed on set for the CDC.
So Jay, since you have a kind of international perspective to this too, are there hints, guidelines you're getting as production opens quicker in other parts of the world that would be useful for people to know, in addition to the great common sense?
Yeah, it depends on where you are and what's happening. Pretty much Iceland, New Zealand, South Korea, a number of countries are pretty much open. Some countries are worse, UK, not so open. So it depends on where you are, what country you're in, what part of the country you're in. So is it a state? Are there city rules? And so the local crew will know what guidelines they have to meet. Kind of a glaring example is we have a Showtime show going on in Budapest where we shot for maybe 3 months into last year, and they broke. A lot of that was time lapse, some of it was interviews. Then they started back up in March with just starting with the time lapse stuff, building out the set in the studio. And 1 week into it, the crew showed up and the gates were locked and they said, "You can't come in, sorry." We're now in August, crew still can't get their gear. It's still in there. One of the 2 studios in Budapest opened. The studio this is being shot in has still not opened, and nobody's really sure why. But one of the things that was holding it up was that the EU was not letting any Americans into any EU countries. So the country of Hungary got an exemption to allow American crew and American actors to come into Hungary so they could do these 2 shows that, these 2 completely different shows that are going on. Why ours studio hasn't opened for us, I don't know. So there you have a country working with an entity like the EU, trying to make sure that they can do what they need to do to get the people in, to get production going. Maybe it's as small as the studio we're shooting in is in one part of Hungary and the other one's nearby, but it's in a different jurisdiction, and so they got a waiver and ours didn't. Don't know. So to answer your question, it depends on where you're going and what the rules are, what's happening. And I think Vietnam, there hasn't been a COVID case in a month or even more. They hardly had any. So my crew there, we have a shoot in Ho Chi Minh City. They're free to go wherever they want. They can wear a mask if they want to. There's almost no restrictions, but you can't get crew into Vietnam. That's the problem. And so the shoot that we'll do, of course, will be through Zoom. So the director will be doing what we're doing, at their computer. So it does really depend on where you're going.
So Mark, in response to that, are you going to be thinking differently about where you go?
No, not necessarily, because our content is developed
Right.
By story, and and by character, and we can't control where those stories or characters happen. So, you know, a company like mine has about 10 or 12 things in development at any given moment, and we're actively talking to networks about new projects, and those projects are all over the place. One of the biggest ones we have, our fingers are crossed that we sell it, would take place quite a bit in Florida. Not simply Florida, but Florida would be a major location. Do I want to go to Florida right now? Well, no, I don't. But, you know, I want to do what I'm supposed to do to make a living. And so the answer is we don't feel that we have the luxury to just pick and choose where we work.
I really appreciate the candor of your answers. Let me just really applaud all of you being so honest with us in terms of how you're approaching what you're working on and kind of the framework you've already given. I mean, I love Carolyn's already decided, I kind of like this new system. I'm just keeping it going, whether there's a virus or not. You know, I love how you're, I won't say exactly embracing, but the lessons you're taking from the situation we're in and how you're already using them forward, for me, is just terrific. We're open to more questions. If we have any more, they've been able to answer them all, I believe, so far. Or does somebody have a idea they want to just try floating and see if anybody would step up and produce it? Interesting. So here's a question, and Jay, I'm going to ask you, and then probably Cathie. As a freelancer working with multiple production companies and studios, should I have my own COVID release form for those companies to sign as well?
Oh, well, depends on who they are. It could be sort of a good luck with that. You can try. We've been dealing, I said earlier, some of the shows that we're on right now, one is a London-based client and one is a Wales-based client. But they have these, the one based in London had like a 15-page document, you know, talked about Lyme disease and all kinds of things, all these health things. And the crew had to sign off on all that stuff. Now, all I can really do to protect everybody is that the studios that we filmed in, the houses we've gone into, the hotel breakout rooms we've had to use, the you know, wherever we had to go to shoot, my philosophy has been whoever controls those four walls and ceiling, they have to step up, and by that I mean that they have to disinfect their doorknobs, their light switches, their bathroom counters, their toilet handles, you know, any tables we're going to be using, they need to keep masks on, you know, so they need to step up that way, because my crew is doing everything in their power to protect not just the interviewee, but anybody else in the space, whether it's a home or a studio, doesn't make any difference. There's going to probably be other people around. So we have asked that they give us the same courtesy to protect our crew. You know, as I said earlier, safety plus creativity. And so far, it's been just brilliant. No one, we haven't gotten any brushback about, you know, I'm not doing that, you know, and so everyone has cooperated so far. I expect that to continue, but that's all that we can really do. You know, I haven't had to really make a client sign anything. None of the crews have asked for that. It could be something that develops. I don't know. So that's what we do. We just ask the other side to cooperate, and our production company clients have been thrilled that I even asked that. They've been in other situations where that question hasn't been asked, or that, you know, that step hasn't been asked to be taken. So they're impressed that I'm actually thinking about everybody, because we're all in this together, whether we want to be in it together or not, right? And that's, you know, been some of my trouble with anti-masker people and some of that, not to get into the politics, but we have to do this to keep our livelihoods going, keep our family safe, keep our friends safe, keep our crew safe, keep the contributors, whoever they are, safe, and the people who are around the contributors that might not have anything to do with the actual thing we're doing in the first place. So that's what's worked so far. So we'll see how it goes.
And I guess I'll add the lawyer answer to that, which I mean, first of all, I totally agree with everything Jay said. And I think, you know, you can't do a production without people working well together. I mean, I think that's one advantage our industry has. There's already a history of being innovative and collaborative and things like that. But think of the situation where, unfortunately, a crew member does get coronavirus, we don't know where, and has serious health issues or passes away, and the estate is upset, and they're upset and they want to sue, and they hire a plaintiff's attorney, and the plaintiff's attorney is doing their job, and they are going to go find out how this poor soul got coronavirus, and finds out that that individual was working on a production for, you know, pick your big, you know, Disney, right? What Disney's going to want to do is have just everything that Jay described, you know, hey, you're doing this, you're disinfecting your doorknobs, but like proof of that, right? And so that's where the protocols come into place. Disney's going to want to hold up their protocols and say, look, we told everyone to do this. Everyone said they were going to do it. We were reasonable here. We were not negligent in creating an unsafe work environment. So that's sort of the purpose of the written documentation behind all this. You know, look, people are, you know, if you tell a reasonable person, hey, we need to be safe, please do these things, a reasonable person gets that, you know, we're all in this together. The purpose of the paperwork behind it is, you know, God forbid something does go south and you're on the wrong end of a lawsuit, you've got some evidence to hold up to say, look, you know, we really tried to do the right thing here. So.
Carolyn, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to ask Jay, when you go into a house and you tell them, you know, to sanitize, you redo it when you come in, and then do you have to do it when you leave? Are you required to do it by the homeowner?
We haven't had that happen yet, but if I can tell one short war story that just happened, I know we're running kind of late, but this was another UK client, unrelated. We had working on a documentary series for them around the US. We had a shoot in San Francisco, just a 2-person crew, go in the guy's house, you know, 1 hour, blah, 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 you know, get the shot, get out. So my phone rang around 11 a.m. and it was the DOP. And he said, just want to check in with you, we're having a little problem. I said, okay, what? He said, the guy's hacking up a lung. He's coughing so badly, we're not going in that house. I said, don't go in that house. He said, by the way, we could do it outside. We could stay, you know, 8-10 feet away. There's a nice little setup we could do. It's really quiet here. We can get the shot for your client. So I called my client in London, told him what happened. And he called the talent and they had a little conversation, and he said, so let's just release the crew. He doesn't want to shoot outside. You know, he paid in full, by the way, no questions asked. My crew was there, they were ready to work, but it was unsafe. And so we hung up the phone, I called the crew back, and he said, I told him what happened. He's like, great, by the way, he came out right before you called the talent and said, you guys are fired, we've already replaced you. So people can be unpredictable, is what I'm saying. And so you have to be very careful. That's one situation where my crew knew, you know, he claimed he was coughing on a piece of toast, but, you know, doesn't really matter. And it turns out his bed was actually in the center of the living room where he wanted us to film. So he was a little, you know, different than most of us. So my crew made a professional decision, the right one. And it's the only time that it's happened. But so I can't really answer that question, Carolyn, about you know, whether my crew will clean up. They'll clean up behind themselves and what they've touched, I guess. But in terms of disinfecting the whole area, I wouldn't think they'd be responsible for that. They just want to get their stuff and get out, you know, in a safe way.
Okay. And just a personal, not a personal question, but since you go internationally, have you sent any crews here to a country where they won't let us in?
Well, no, because people call me to get crew in that country.
Okay.
So I have crew in 114 different countries. So that's
Okay.
usually why they're calling me.
Okay.
If it's a country where there's really no crew, you know, and there are a few still where there's just no, the kind of crew that we're accustomed to providing, that's a different story. You know, Sierra Leone and Liberia, there's a few countries in Western Africa and some others where there's just really not the kind of caliber of crew and gear that you need. So maybe they come from Nigeria or whatever. That's a situation we haven't had to deal with yet. So we'll deal with it when we have to.
Okay.
So, Jay, I'm just curious about the crew that all their equipment is still sitting in a studio in Budapest. Kind of means they're probably not taking any other jobs because their equipment is sitting in a locked studio in Budapest. Are they going to, do you think they'll be paid for it at the end of it? Or, you know,
Every 2 weeks.
for 24 hours or something to get it?
Every 2 weeks since March.
Nice. I like your clients, Jay.
Well, they're a great client, and they know the studio simply will not let my crew in because they were doing construction. So there's stuff everywhere, and just due to safety reasons, COVID aside, you know, for them to get in there, it's all the time lapse stuff. So they have to, you know, be climbing up and getting stuff, and they can't unless there's construction crew there, you know, to get stuff out of the way. To make it safe for them to go in, you know, physically, again, COVID aside. And so we're just anxious for the actual show to get back into production. So that's how we've dealt with it. They've been very cool about it. There's no way, there's nothing we can do.
Huh. So Mark, any last thoughts you want to give us as kind of the person right in between both of these conversations? What advice do you want to give us to make it work?
I don't know that there's anything I can say that I haven't said already. I think giving yourself as much time to plan. I think that pre-production is more important than it's ever been. Pre-production is obviously very important creatively. It's the time where we really get the production up and onto its feet. But having this as an added layer just means you need all that much more runway to land your plane safely. And so, you know, if you do have a client that's pressing you to get going and to jump on it, take a deep breath and try and push back to the degree that you can to get as much time to plan ahead as you can. That would be my best advice.
Thank you. And Cathie, maybe this is a little bit more for you. We have a couple people who are talent in the meeting, and they want to know if you think there are any special concerns for them. And then I know, Carolyn, it's something the makeup and hair people talked about a lot, but we've done a lot from the crew side of it. Right. Are there any kind of for the talent side, any special considerations for them?
Yeah, I mean, well, talent is the most vulnerable, right? You've got stylists doing your makeup, your hair, unless you're doing remote styling, wardrobe perhaps. And then you're performing, you're doing your scene. And depending on what the shoot is, you may be in close proximity with somebody else. Is it an intimacy scene? Is it a fight scene? Hopefully those are not being, you know, creative decisions are hopefully being adjusted in light of what's going on. You know, and there may be things that you're just not comfortable doing. You know, everyone's comfort level is going to be different. So having said that, you know, scenes with food, you know, there's a suggestion out there, if there's a scene with food, have, you know, the props people make, you know, 4 versions of the food so that, you know, the food's produced in a sanitary way if you have to do reshoots or retakes. So, you know, nothing special other than you guys are unfortunately the most vulnerable because everyone else can keep a mask on. But if the shoot, you know, we talked about nowadays, maybe it is the right way to do a shoot talent with the mask on because that's our reality, but that might not be the case for every production. And if you're unmasked, you know, after you've got your makeup on and until your scene is, you know, done, that's a vulnerability. I know we're wrapping. I just wanted to say 2 other things about just kind of parting thoughts. Signage, signage, signage. Put your signs up, you know, hey, while you're waiting to be checked in, you know, stand 6 feet apart. Hey, while you're in the bathroom, as I said, shut the toilet, you know, all these reminders, make a sign, put it up ahead of time. And then the other thing I would emphasize is tone from the top. You know, those of you who are producers or, you know, senior crew on set, people listen and people follow, and you need to model that good behavior and let people know you're taking it very seriously, and obviously why you're taking it seriously, because you want to keep everyone safe. But don't discount the tone from the top, the value that that will have in ensuring everyone's safe on set.
And Carolyn, any special pointers for talent from your perspective?
Well, for talent and for production crew, it's just time and patience, because we're going to need, you know, whereas before, you know, one comes in after another and you barely have time to clean up. And, you know, it's just, we need at least a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes in between to be able to clean and disinfect and make it safe for the next client. And, you know, I'm really adamant about doing that because I want the talent to feel safe. My girlfriend in California said she has some A-list actors and actresses that want just a makeup brush for themselves. They don't want to use anything. And she says she just buys it and she just puts that cost to the producer. And she said it's worked out. And she said the only thing about going on scene the first day is when they say, okay, we're ready to shoot, everybody kind of runs around and forgets that it's COVID. But she said, you know, just slow down, be patient. It's going to be a learning curve. And once you do it for a while, everything will become more natural. And it's going to be that way for the next year or so for us. So, and hopefully by that time, you know, we will have just all learned to slow down and be more patient. And, you know, that's not normally our world. It's rush around and time to shoot and makeup. And, you know, another thing for the producers to consider also is, for makeup artists, is when after we've made up the talent, let us know whether you want us, when you call makeup, if they're shining, to come out, or we can give the talent a powder puff to take care of themselves. And also, you know, they're recommending if you have the background talent, they can come with makeup on, or, you know, so it just depends on how close they're going to be to the camera. And so that's something to consider in planning as well.
Well, and that's one of the other things we also discussed a while ago. If, I don't know, Julia Roberts, she's the only one I can think of right now. Does she have her own makeup artist and nobody else uses them? You know, does it actually lead to some additional crew on set in terms of those people who are critical to the thing going on? You know, it might be one thing if the sound guy falls out, is he easy to replace, but do you replace Julia Roberts in 24 hours or 36 or whatever? So there was that piece too of just, is there almost further isolation of those mission critical people with their own team, which just started to seem funny, and I could just see Ricky Gervais making a whole series about it. But I'd like to thank everybody for their input, and if anybody has last comments, time and patience seems like a great one for many things in life. The signage, yoo-hoo. And I'm really going to think, I'm always coaching people on pre-production, Mark, but I've never used the metaphor of you really need a good runway to land that plane. So thank you for that. I'm just like, it's such a clear image in my mind now. And Jay, always.
My check out to cash, Melissa, no problem.
I will do that. Thank you. Jay, thank you for helping to put the team together. I really appreciated the expertise you brought to it nationally and internationally, and being in 144 countries. Woohoo! And 27 years. Many congratulations. We're so excited that you make this kind of country your place. So I will share the kind of links and stuff that came up in the chat. I will get it out to people. Oh, maybe I'll do it tonight. But you'll have it by tomorrow probably. And oh, great. Cathie Cadis has just let us know too that she has makeup guidelines that she's starting to send to her clients. So that's a great piece too. And if she's willing to share it, we'll make sure that it gets out to a broader audience.
Yeah, that's what I've done as well. I've sent protocols to the clients I have as to, you know, my equipment, and yeah, so it seemed to work. They all seem to be very receptive to it.
And Jay has his protocols that are going out in advance too. So I really appreciate that proactivity that you're all bringing to the system. Thank you for also the slightly different time for this program. I hope it worked for people. And thank you very much. There's such exciting things going on in this area by the creatives that are here, and I really appreciate sharing this level of expertise with them. So thank you very much. And if anybody has follow-up questions, they can get them to me, director@wif.org, and I'll make sure they get to the appropriate people for you. So happy Wednesday one.
Thank you, Melissa.
Happy
Careful out
anniversary.
there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
See you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.